interactive discussion on the PTI Update 2013. My name is Todd Baggett, and I am the President and CEO of Redline Solutions, as well as the co-chair of the PTI Technology Working Group. Along with me today will be Dan Vaché, the Vice President of Supply Chain for United Fresh, and my co-chair as the PTI Technology Working Group, as well as Gary Fleming, who is our VP of Strategic Services and one of the early architects of the PTI. A few housekeeping things for our webinar today. You'll see on the left-hand side of your screen a slide bar, and if you move that bar, you can actually make the presentation or the background smaller and the pictures larger. And at this point, what we can do is I'd like to go ahead and start out by making sure everyone also knows that if you have questions, you can enter those into the question window in the lower right-hand part of the webinar window, and we will review those and answer questions for you as the webinar gets to that point. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and get started. And Gary, can you give us our first question?
Sure, thanks, Todd. Let's go ahead and get started with questions. The first question is going to go out to Dan. Dan, there wasn't much visible progress in the PTI in 2012. Can you tell us what's new in 2013?
Certainly, Gary. It's a great question because those of us that are deeply involved in the PTI on a day-to-day basis saw a lot of activity. One of the highlights that we had recently was the completion of a pilot between a leading national retailer and the Oppenheimer Group out of Canada, and they were testing the use of the AS856 Advanced Ship Notice, and plus the produce implementation guidelines that have been developed. The goal of the pilot was to test these new implementation guidelines that are specific to produce. Finally, we have them that are specific to produce, which is a great advantage for us. The completion of a pilot between a national retailer and the Oppenheimer Group of the 856 notice was the goal was to be able to understand how in produce the ASN is going to flow through. Some of the results included savings, and these are monetary savings at both ends of the supply chain. It creates a reliable method to share traceability information between the trading partners. It allows for one scan of the entire pallet regardless of how many different products or lot numbers are contained on that pallet. It certainly minimizes errors, and one of the shippers that we've dealt with using the ASN has a projected savings of the ASN over the hybrid pallet label of $120,000 per year, or quite honestly, for them, it looks like it's going to be a 6 months return on the investment. And there's even more operational benefits when the the HPL, hybrid pallet label, is no longer needed by the receiving trading partners.
Okay, Dan, let's go ahead and go to the next question. I know you guys, both of you, were really busy last week at PMA's Fresh Summit in New Orleans. The PTI Leadership Council met last week. Can you share with us any updates that you have? And Dan, let's go ahead and start with you first, please.
Sure, Gary. Along the same lines, we had that discussion of the hybrid pallet label versus the ASN. That hybrid pallet label was created at least 4 years ago, when most folks were not even knowledgeable about the ASN. So we had a very healthy discussion on that because the HPL is actually serving its purpose of bridging the need of some retailers and or their supply trading partners who are not yet using EDI for shipping information. Some of the larger growers have been doing advanced ship notices, and they don't require the HPL with their trading partners, although they have other trading partners that are going to require the HPL for a period of time. Now, the implementation working group has created a draft document called the Use of Hybrid Pallet Label by Receivers Best Practice Guide that is currently under review and is expected to be published on the PTI website in the very near future. To find out more about the implementation guideline and these new best practices, make sure that you all visit the website www.producetraceability.org for the latest updates.
Okay, you know, Dan mentioned the ASN and the hybrid pallet tag. So what I'd like to do to get our audience caught up on this to make sure everyone has a good understanding the difference of the two, I'm going to take you through a few quick slides to show you the difference between an advanced ship notice and the hybrid pallet label or the hybrid pallet tag. Let's start with the ASN, the advanced ship notice. There are three components that will show or reside on a pallet. The first component is the actual pallet label itself. On that pallet label is a barcode. This barcode is called the GS1 128 barcode. It's the same barcode that's used on the case label, as a matter of fact. Inside that barcode is a number. The number is an 18-digit number called the SSCC, or Serialized Shipping Container Code. That's what's inside that barcode. Well, you start with assigning this 18-digit number to a pallet. As you build that pallet, for every case that goes onto that pallet, you go ahead and you link that information from that case to that pallet number, that 18-digit pallet number. In this example, there's 20 cases having G10A and lot A, B, C, D. If you add more cases to this pallet, so it's a mixed pallet, you again link that information to that 18-digit number. And in this example, there are 3 different items on this pallet. So all this information is linked to that 18-digit number. Then you take that information and it's formatted into what we call an advanced ship notice document. In this particular example, you can see that there are 3 different pallets on this order. If you look underneath each pallet, the advanced ship notice will tell you the quantity of cases and the information for those cases for each pallet that resides in that order. That document then is then sent to the receiver's computer, and it's sitting there in the receiver's computer awaiting for the truck to arrive at their facility. Once the truck arrives at their facility, they unload the pallet, they read or scan that barcode that has that 18-digit number in it. It retrieves that SSCC number, and then it goes to their system and says, all right, what does that 18-digit number mean again? And then it conveys to them, oh, this particular pallet had 20 cases of this, 30 cases of that, and 50 cases of another. That is what the advanced ship notice does. Now let's change focus a little bit and talk about the hybrid pallet tag or the hybrid pallet label. If you look at this, this pallet tag, it was called hybrid for a reason. As Dan articulated earlier, it's for those that use the advanced ship notice and for those that do not use the advanced ship notice. If you use the advanced ship notice, you only focus on the very bottom of this label. You notice there's a very thick line that separates the bottom barcode from all the top barcodes above it. So if you use the advanced ship notice, you just focus on that bottom barcode, you scan that barcode, and you're done. It's one scan, and you're done. If you do not use the advanced ship notice, then you're going to focus on everything above the bottom barcode. Let's take a quick look at what's inside each of these barcodes that are above that bottom barcode. Let's start with the 02 in parentheses tells the scanner that the case that's residing on that pallet has this particular G10 number. If you look at the 10 in parentheses, it tells the scanner what number to follow as a lot or batch number. And then finally, if you look at that 37 with the parentheses, it shows the quantity having that G10 and lot number that resides on that pallet. So here are the options that you have. Option 1 is you scan in that bottom barcode and you're done. That's if you're using the advanced ship notice. Option 2 is that you scan all these other subsequent barcodes, and it too will tell you what's on that pallet. And you can see the difference of that, 1 scan versus, in this particular case, 7 scans. If you don't do either one of those, then your only other option that you have left is to tear down the pallet and scan every individual case on that pallet. And in this example, there are 190 individual cases that reside on this pallet. So that is the difference between the advanced ship notice and the hybrid pallet tag. So let's go ahead and get back to our questions. Let's start with Dan as we get back to these questions. Dan, could you tell us, are there any other retailers using the advanced ship notice right now?
Well, first of all, Gary, there's a good overview on that very complicated, sometimes HPL and ASN. But most retailers are already using the ASN with their CPG, which is a consumer packaged goods normally found in the center of the store. Their suppliers are already doing this for them, and many retailers use a different system for their CPG business versus their fresh food business sectors. So they first need to adjust their systems. That's a big challenge for these retailers to adjust their systems used in produce to accommodate the use of an ASN, which is one of the stumbling blocks that they found upon, got into the PTI they found. The ASN is usually sent through various retail supply chain portals. As an example, iTrade is one of those. The retailers overall have made the statement that they are moving towards the ASN for produce because they see the advantages of that, and still others are in the testing mode to make sure that their systems are capable of structuring that ASN and receiving that information.
All right, thanks, Dan. And Todd, let's pick up with you. As Dan mentioned, there are some advantages to this. Can you list the advantages and disadvantages of the ASN for us?
Sure. So, as Dan had just alluded to, that the retailers definitely see the advantage of the ASN, and as your illustration really pointed out, it's primarily the difference of one scan versus multiple scans. The advantage of that also is within the ASN, it's not just the traceability information. There's a lot of other information that would be included, such as if there had been substitutions, those would be in the ASN, so the receiver would know in advance that they're not looking for the original G10 that was ordered, but some quantity of the original and the substituted G10 as well. Also, they would know the pallet configuration, so by scanning that one barcode, they know exactly what's on that pallet, and it also addresses any changes in the shipping quantities. There's additional information in there as well, such as the carrier ID and a whole lot of other information that's in the ASN that gives the receiver all the information they need with that one scan. Now, on the disadvantages, probably the primary disadvantage is that the ASN does require EDI, or electronic data interchange, and as Dan had mentioned, that's usually going through some type of a supply chain provider like an iTrade, who is going to then format that data, put the rest of the data together, and package that in the 856 ASN advanced ship notification that goes to the retailer. The other option that you have is you're not using a supply chain provider. You would be having your own EDI software that is going to take that information, package it up, and send it directly to your receiver.
All right, thanks, Todd. All right, let's move on. Are there any other updates that you have from the PTI Leadership Council meeting? Let's start with Todd. Let's start with you on that, please.
Sure. So one thing that I'm excited about is the Technology Working Group has been tasked to define a standard data format for communicating the traceability information to the trading partners or any interested parties. The idea behind this is that if the FDA or other responsible parties are receiving that information and every grower is shipping it from their own system and those systems do not follow a standard format, it would take an extreme amount of time for the FDA to compile that information and put it into a useful form. What we've been tasked to do is to come up with a standard format which would allow them to take that data and quickly be able to start using it and get into action.
All right, thank you. Dan, how about yourself?
Well, Gary, and following up on what Todd said, it's very important to understand that as a user of the information, it's just a matter of how you get it out of your system. It's not going to be a great amount of work. You're already going to have that data, but it is a good standard that the Technology Working Group is going to have. The other thing that happened at the Leadership Council for PTI is that we did have the Food Marketing Institute come to us and say they are in agreement that the PTI is the path to take for produce and other perishable products that their members deal with. So it's not just produce. Now, their board of directors has also acknowledged this and are completely behind the process that we have established with the Produce Traceability Initiative. Another thing that has come on to the scene is a new Global Food Traceability Center that the PTI working groups are keeping an eye on to ensure that the PTI is recognized as really the standard going forward for perishable products. So that was very nice to know that we're involved there. We have a number of folks that are part of that traceability center. The other thing that we got an update on was the Food Service GS1 Standards Initiative that most folks have been hearing about for a number of years. It has been in conjunction with the PTI running on a fairly parallel course, although with the food service initiatives, they are looking at all the broad line. It's not just their perishable products. But they are not as far along as the PTI, but using the same standards, which again will help the members of our industry that provide food service products. So it was a very good meeting, Gary. We had a lot of updates, and very valuable information comes out of those Leadership Council meetings as we gather.
All right, thanks, Dan. Todd, did you want to talk a little bit about the Communications Working Group? We have a bullet point here. Do you want to talk about that at all?
I do. So one of the things that our Communications Working Group has been doing a fantastic job, and I must say that all of the members of the Leadership Council have shown extreme dedication to make sure that the PTI is successful, and as what Dan just shared with us, that has actually been well received by all food groups, and the FMI and other groups are also very supportive and very appreciative of the work that we've done in the PTI. Our Communications Working Group has requested that companies either create or update their PTI scorecards on the producetraceability.org website by November 15th. This is just a way in which they're assessing where we are as an industry, and it's important that you go in there and you actually make sure that your company's information is known. This is not going outside of the PTI leadership group in any detail format. It's simply summary data that's useful in providing kind of an update to the industry, both our industry and the food groups in general, on what's going on with the produce industry on PTI compliance.
All right, thanks, Todd. All right, let's change focus a little bit of information on what most companies want to hear, and that is, Dan, where are we with retailer adoption on the PTI?
Well, Gary, I think as we've seen through the last couple of years, it's been somewhat of a slow adoption pace. But with the recent announcement, or not so recent now, by Wal-Mart that they have a soft start date of November 1st and a January 1st hard date that they announced back in late May. So, you know, that really gives a lot of momentum to the PTI, because I know a lot of the industry has been waiting for that national retailer to put some dates out there so they know exactly what the landscape looks like for them. Now, we've had other folks in the past couple of years have put their desires out there without necessarily hard dates. But another one that recently joined that crew is Whole Foods, who announced that they would be moving to PTI by mid-2014 in conjunction with their new sustainability and fair label practices initiative that was recently announced. So we have them. That's another good, obviously, some momentum will be built there. Now we have the other ones that are more regionally based, Gary, that have put their desires out there, but they're going to start getting more firm, at least in our belief and from what they tell us. And these include Publix in the Southeast, Associated Wholesale Grocers down in Baton Rouge, who I recently met with, and they're very happy to see more momentum there. We have Aldi's and Food Lion have all made their announcement in the past 2 years, along with a number of members of the PROACT group, which again, that leads over to food service, and they also do retail. But again, they're going to start creating their own momentum now that we have a national leader out there. So it's been very positive on that front, Gary.
All right, great. Well, thanks, Dan. All right, let's go to the next question. You know, there's been some rumors, you know, similar to what happened with the RFID activity a while back. There's some rumors that, you know, the Wal-Mart requirement's not very firm and it might slip. I mean, Dan, what are you hearing with that?
Well, Gary, we've gone back a long ways on this, and you're absolutely right. But, you know, Wal-Mart has put their information out there. And, Todd, you were involved in a conference call we had in early June after that announcement was made with the Technology Working Group with Mike Agostini. Their tone, quite honestly, has not shifted. In fact, I recently met with their director of QC, and he is very well aware of what the DCs have to do to prepare for the November 1st and the January goal. So that's been a positive. The other thing that, unfortunately, Mike Agostini, who is co-chair of the Leadership Council for the PTI, was not able to join us at our last meeting due to some real heavy travel that he's been doing for his organization. But nonetheless, he did provide us an update. And quite honestly, they are not shifting a bit. Wal-Mart has certainly seen, as he's reported, a flurry of activity and has definitely ramped up as the deadline approaches, with questions coming to Wal-Mart on those dates. And here's what they're really seeing, as Mike reported, in terms of readiness. Most of the medium to large U.S.-based suppliers are ready or able to get ready in a short amount of time. We know that they've been out there, they have the equipment in place, but until they start getting firm requests, they've kind of put it in the mothballs. Now they're ready to take the tarp off and start labeling all of their cases. The smaller U.S.-based suppliers are a mixed bag, as we know. Gary, I know you deal with a lot of them. And there are some that are fully ready, to those that are ready to implement but haven't yet, and then those who have not been in the PTI loop at all. And I think that's very important to recognize. There's still a lot of folks out there that need a lot of help. So as far as Wal-Mart's concerned, they are right in line with what we've been talking about as far as getting those cases labeled. Now, the challenge that they have is they are not quite ready to use the ASN. As big as they are, and they use it in other groups and parts of their organization, but they're staying in line, but their ASN efforts have been delayed. And that is because the produce ASN project was folded into the larger Wal-Mart global case tracking initiative this past summer. So it really delayed their initial launch of wanting to have right out of the chute the ASN. So it has delayed it, but they are going to look for much better results when they are capable of using the ASN in the not too distant future, and it will be consistent upon all work departments within their organization. With what Wal-Mart really strives for, they've got to keep their efficiencies, and so they're spreading it out through all of their departments to be consistent on how they're dealing with this information. But again, as Mike will always emphasize, I don't talk for Wal-Mart, none of us talk for Wal-Mart, but any supplier with questions or issues should direct them right directly to their, what they call their sources, or the local buyer, or the desk director, which everyone that deals with Wal-Mart knows who their contact is. So Gary, they're really, if there's any rumors out there, they're sticking to their guns November 1st, January 1.
Yeah, Dan, thank you. Well, I tell you, that answers a lot of questions because I get that asked almost on a daily basis, so thank you for that. I appreciate that. So Todd, let's shift to you with the next question. So what has this Wal-Mart announcement done to your business? How has it affected Redline's business?
For us, we've had a substantial increase in activity from people who are recognizing that Wal-Mart's an important customer for them and that they want to meet the requirements. And as Dan said, this isn't a surprise to anyone. The PTI has been out there for a long time. Redline's been educating people about things in the PTI space since 2008. I think the producetraceability.org organization and GS1 have both done exceptional jobs as well to make sure that everyone's aware that this is out there. But we're all seeing a big increase in business. But one other part I wanted to talk about in this one is how the trade associations can actually be useful to their members in this area. We had a recent experience with the competitive evaluation and selection by the Wisconsin Potato and Vegetable Association, and really they showed how the trade associations can play a key role in helping their members understand and navigate PTI requirements. What they did is they used the association and some of their key shippers to do a thorough review of the vendors, identify the key needs of the members that they serve, and to select the best option for their members. By doing this, the trade association, saved their members hundreds of hours of individual research and actually had a synergistic effect of being able to get the best of the people that they had involved in this to help really understand how to make a selection and make sure that it worked for all their members. So I would encourage other trade associations out there to consider this as a valuable service that they can provide for their members.
Yeah, and I think, Todd, let me ask you a quick question on that same line. Sure. Was that a function of their members coming to them, or was it more proactive on the Wisconsin Trade Association's behalf?
My perception on this is that it was a little bit of a combination of both. I think that starting out, the trade association actually did research and actually had us come out, you, Gary, and specifically did some consulting with them back in February just to make sure that their members understood the PTI and what was going on. And then what they decided amongst themselves was, hey, each one of us individually doing our evaluations is going to be problematic because if we all select different vendors, we're not going to have consistency of data amongst the shippers. So I think it really was a combination of the trade association being proactive and getting out in front of this issue for their members, and then their members being very responsive and realizing that they had an opportunity to work together to solve this as a team as opposed to having each company try to do it individually.
All right, thanks, Todd. Very well done. All right, let's move on to the next question. You know, there was an interesting announcement that occurred a couple of weeks ago. GS1 had announced that they're reducing the cost for companies to obtain a company prefix. So I guess this question goes out to Dan. Dan, what role did the PTI Leadership Council play in this recent announcement?
Well, I'm not sure if we had a direct input onto that, but we certainly have been chirping in their ears, and mainly due to the fact that our industry has so many small and medium-sized suppliers, Gary, that, number one, we're not even aware of the GS1 standards. So what happens is when we communicate with them, whether it's directly with them on one-to-one basis or the Leadership Council, GS1 US finally recognized that the number of small and medium-sized companies has made a real challenge for them because of their customer service getting calls on the pricing. So they have made it now more economically feasible to jump in, purchase a company prefix, and get ready for the PTI. They have adjusted their pricing accordingly. And as Angela Fernandez announced last week in a forum, a new GS1 pricing structure that came into effect October 1 is making the process more affordable for that small grower. The new pricing is based on annual sales and capacity needed or the number of items needing assignment. The new pricing structure is now solely based on the capacity of the supply side. Prior to October 1, the GS1 US entry, the lowest amount was $760, and now the lowest price is $250 with a $50 annual renewal fee. So GS1 US has really listened to us, Gary, and the trade, and saying, you know, we need to make sure that all of the participants in the produce industry are able to participate and not make it a burden just to get their GS1 company prefix. So we're very pleased with what GS1 US has done as a partner in the PTI.
If I may add to that, Gary, if I could add to that, I think one of our other key wins there is Angela Fernandez from GS1 has been really one of the co-chairs of the PTI Leadership Council. So she's heard the message directly and has done an excellent job of taking that forward in her organization to get buy-in to do something that, quite frankly, has not been done before. So kudos to Angela and GS1 for really making a difference in the produce industry.
And, you know, I'm going to add to that as well, and thanks, Todd and Dan, for that. I want to add to that as well that, you know, when I'm talking to these companies on a day-to-day basis, a lot of them don't even realize it, but they already have a company prefix. And just to make sure that people understand it, the generic company prefix, that 033383 number, is not a company prefix you can use for your G10. So you need to use your own company prefix. If you're unsure as to whether or not you have a company prefix, you can certainly call GS1 and ask them, and they'll let you know if you've been assigned a GS1 company prefix in the past. So I just wanted to clarify that a little bit. All right, let's move on. Dan, this question goes to you. This is an interesting question I get asked quite a bit. Is the PTI being used in Canada or any other countries as well?
Well, Gary, that is a great question because we oftentimes get that. Now, as we all know, our Canadian counterparts, the Canadian Produce Marketing Association, has been a full partner in the PTI since its inception because many of their grower shippers up there do supply our U.S. retailers, food service distributors, and wholesalers. So, but overall, the Canadians and the retailers specifically have been watching the PTI, and they are amidst, quite honestly, nationally, of their own version of FSMA, the Food Safety Modernization Act. It is called the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. They are the ones that are similar to the FDA, and they have embarked on a change and modernization agenda, which will lead to more traceability for them. But that's propelled by the new Safe Food for Canadians Act, the FSMA, and that has a stronger focus on stronger food safety rules, same as we are doing with FSMA, more effective inspections, commitment to service, and more information to consumers. And there will be, it's assumed that there will be a traceability element in there. And the CPMA has been a great partner with us, and they communicate openly on what's going on in Canada. So we see the Canadians coming in eventually into a PTI type compliance. We do have other countries recognizing PTI, because if they're supplying the industry here in the States, they have to comply with the PTI. So I also sit on a different board. It's called the International Federation of Produce Standards. It's an organization where the objective is to manage and harmonize standards for the produce industry. So that group, we make sure, is very well aware of what's going on here and around the globe, so that they don't get disparate initiatives asking for something else. And just this morning, when I came in, I had received an email with information that Finland is going to start requesting their version of PTI using the GS1 standard. So here we have a country, not a large country, but Finland is going to demand somewhat similar to the PTI using these standards. So I'm not sure how many people will supply Finland here from the U.S., but it's now recognized that the PTI is a vehicle that every country can use, and the whole world is keeping a close watch on the development of the PTI. So I think we can be proud that we are a global leader here in establishing good whole chain traceability for our products.
Thanks, Dan. And I'm going to add a quick comment to that. GS1 standards is used in over 145 countries worldwide, and the large majority of PTI requirements are based upon the GS1 standards. And as such, if this information is on a label that's imported or exported, the chances of them being able to read the information and understand what a G10 is very good, simply because the GS1 standards have been implemented in over 145 countries worldwide. So that kind of adds to that. So thanks, Dan. Todd, we're going to shift focus to an acronym called the GDSN, or the Global Data Synchronization Network. There seems to be some confusion in the industry as to whether that is part of PTI or not. Can you help us out with that, please?
Certainly. So, you know, the GDSN Global Data Synchronization Network is really just one of many ways to synchronize your data between the buyer and the seller. There's not a firm requirement, in fact, there's no requirement in PTI at all to use that particular one. It is one that is used by some of the large receivers, and it's one that's available through GS1, and that's why it probably gets more visibility than some of the lesser-known ones that are out there. There has been a lot of work done in the data attributes by the implementation working group to ensure harmonization between the data elements that are pertinent to the PTI and those that are residing on the GDSN.
All right, thanks, Todd. All right, Dan, let's go back to you for one final question before we turn it over to the audience. You know, many shippers are putting their PTI compliance in place now, obviously, to meet these customer requirements. Let's talk a little bit about what you're hearing from your regulatory team about the Food Safety Modernization Act. And you know, a follow-up to that, Dan, I'm sorry, a follow-up to that would be, how closely will that align with the PTI?
I love that question, Gary, because we get that all the time. Now, United Fresh, being based in Washington, D.C., has very close connections with FDA. Dr. Dave Gombas on our staff is in consistent contact with the FDA, dealing specifically with that big world of FSMA. We also have direct contact from my counterpart at PMA, Ed Tracy, who has a regular meeting and informs us all of the meeting with Sherry McGarry of the FDA, who is really impressed and has been since day one when we've met with her on the progress the PTI makes, and especially in 2013. We inform her on a continual basis of how the industry is performing. And she's very supportive of the groups moving to a standardized format, which we have now, in which data can be sent to the FDA, because you know we're all going to collect this information, but when they have to come in and start looking for a traceback, they're looking for consistent information so they can do it quickly, and that's one of their wishes. So it's really going to be interesting when we get a format out there that will enable the FDA and other interested parties to import and begin analyzing the data. You know, we're going to get some good visibility here in a much quicker format during a foodborne illness event. So we're really going to be able to, when we accomplish our task here, be able to do a trace back very quickly. On the FSMA front, when we meet with them, we know that we should not now expect to see the draft on record-keeping requirements until mid-2014 at the earliest. Now, we also know, or at least our feeling is, and with the experience that our staff has, the FDA is not going to be any more prescriptive than they have been for traceability. They know what industry is doing. They know what other food groups are doing along with us. But they already have legislation, Gary. They have legislation one step forward, one step back. What concerned them is that we didn't have good records. But now that they've seen industry having standardized record keeping, they can do a trace back and fulfill their desire to do that within 24 hours with consistent information. Really does keep them happy with what the industry is doing, and they can focus on other parts of FSMA and knowing that traceability is being taken care of by the industry. We have a monthly conference call with the Fresh Food Association group. This includes dairy, deli, meat, poultry, you name it, anything on the perimeter of that store. They are meeting with us and developing their own standards, using the basic standards that we're using, because they know that the buy side wants consistent data coming into them. So they're very excited to see us kind of be that poster child, but they have their own initiatives, and you'll see those unrolling in the next 12 months or so, when they know they have to have good traceability also. So all in all, we see FSMA moving slowly at that glacial speed. With the shutdown of the government, it just threw them back a little bit further, but sometime in 2014, we're going to start to see some rollout on this, and we're very confident that it will not derail the PTI at all.
You know, it's interesting, and Dan, thank you. What's interesting, having read a lot of the FSMA rules, and it's very laborious to get through, but your comment was very interesting in that you said, this is one of the things, part of FSMA, that the industry can pretty much take care of with very little effort, relatively speaking, on behalf of the FDA, and I agree with that. Most of the activity, if we as an industry move forward and implement the PTI, we're just going to allow the plumbing and the framework for them to be able to conduct their traceback investigation a lot faster and a lot more efficiently. So, well said. I agree with that. Well, listen, let's go ahead and let's turn control over to you, the audience. If you could, type in your questions in the lower right-hand side of the screen, and then we'll have Carol over at our location ask the questions of the three panelists.
Thanks, Gary. Actually, we already have a question from Dave, and he's asking us today if we have an update on Wal-Mart's PTI compliance schedule specific to Canada.
I can take that one, Gary, initially. You can chime in, I'm sure. But the Wal-Mart initiative for PTI is strictly within the U.S. Distribution centers. It does not include Canada or anywhere else in the world at this point. I think you may have heard me say earlier that they're trying to get everything standardized on a worldwide basis. So I wouldn't be surprised, and they're going to expect, of course, any imports to be PTI compliant. But I don't think anyone would be surprised that eventually Wal-Mart expands this around the globe. But right now, it's strictly with the U.S.
I would agree with that, and again, I think if you're in Canada and you're shipping to the U.S., where a Wal-Mart U.S. distribution center, as Dan was mentioning, that's where you need to be concerned about your compliance today, not shipping within Canada.
And if you do supply Canadian Wal-Marts, I'd wholly recommend you just go ahead and label theirs too, because they'll be looking at that shortly. In my estimation, anyway. I don't speak for them.
Great.
Do we have any other questions at this point, Carol?
No, but Dave sent us a little thank you, so you're very welcome, Dave. I encourage anyone else who has questions to go ahead and enter them in the little panel on the right-hand side of your screen.
In the meantime, I have a question that I think I get asked quite a bit, so I'd like to ask it of Dan and Todd, and that is, a lot of people that I talk to on a daily basis seem to confuse food safety with traceability. Can either of you comment on the differences between the two so that people are clear when they're dealing with a food safety audit versus dealing with the PTI?
I guess I can take first stab at that. I think we need to make sure that we understand PTI is not food safety. PTI is traceability. And traceability can be a great vehicle for a lot of different things for the industry once we get it established. You're going to have great visibility through the supply chain. If your trading partners are sharing that information, you can really see the flow of product. The buy side themselves can see better probably inventory. They're starting to gather information. But I think when it comes to food safety, we have to make sure that PTI is not a panacea for food safety at all. What PTI does is it gives the FDA the ability, when they have a suspected product that they want to look at in the supply chain, that there is a vehicle that they can quickly identify where that product came from, where it is today, where it was yesterday, but really by lot number, understand where that product is. Now that will help them with food safety and making sure that the consumers have the confidence in what our industry is doing. But let's make sure that we separate that. The Food Safety Modernization Act, they're really looking at preventive elements. That's really their focus here. But when we do have an issue, and I got to say when, it's never going to go away. There's risk in our industry. But when there is a challenge to us to trace our product, we're going to have the vehicle that's going to do it very quickly and efficiently and really get back to that consumer to say the produce industry and other industries that follow suit have a good handle on where their products are. They're doing anything they can preventive. But you know, we have a very long and convoluted supply chain. It's not in anyone's possession all the time. So it's a good thing that we're married with the FDA so they understand and we are a tool for them to use.
Todd, did you want to comment on that?
First of all, Dan, excellent answer. I think that you really nailed it there. The only thing I would throw in there is that the confusion that I see sometimes is people say, well, you know, I just had a food safety audit, so I'm good on my traceability. Again, they're two separate things. Good practices and food safety is really an element of the science, and how do we use our gap analysis to close any potential problems that we have and really minimize the potential to have a food-borne illness outbreak. However, the traceability aspect is really twofold. Number one is to help the FDA get things identified and get those lots out of commerce as quickly as possible, but also to clear the growers who are not affected by it and whose product is not in commerce that's part of this. As we saw back in 2006 with spinach, 2009 with tomatoes, the industry-wide commodity recalls are tremendously damaging not only to the individual companies whose product is pulled off the shelf when they had nothing to do with it and the cost that they bear, but also just the cost of our confidence with the consumers within our industry. And you know, when you pull everything off the shelf, it kind of says that commodity is not a safe commodity. And if we look at spinach consumption levels, they've still not returned to the levels that they were back in 2006. This traceability is going to help us make sure that we can minimize it and do strategic recalls instead of doing these industry-wide commodity recalls that give us all a black eye.
Great point.
How would you guys respond to comments of, well, you know, I already have traceability. I already can track product to the source. How would you respond to that, and therefore I don't need PTI?
Well, Gary, I'd want to know who's asking that question, quite honestly. As we well know, most of the supply side has tremendous internal traceability. They know which grower they have. They know which field it came out of. But, you know, again, we have that long and sometimes convoluted supply chain. We've got to pass this information down. You know, we've seen in the past where a product has been implicated, and all of a sudden, 2 weeks later, they're finding out it got into distribution much further than anyone ever realized, and whether it's cases or partial pallets have gone into areas that the supplier really didn't know. If a product has been rejected, it's taken to a wholesale terminal market, it's broken down there. If no one's keeping track of those lot numbers on a consistent basis, that's where we get this issue that Todd has pointed out, that we can damage a whole category of the produce industry, which we need to avoid at all costs. And you mentioned it, Gary. the spinach industry, they should be leaps and bounds over where they are today. They took so long to try and recover from that and gain that consumer confidence back. And that, again, Todd mentioned it, I've mentioned it. Ultimately, what we have to do is please that consumer and make sure that when they go into a store or a restaurant and they're consuming produce, they don't think twice about it. It's as safe as can be, knowing, I know, you know, that there is some risk, but there's a risk when we get out of bed. But anyway, we're minimizing that risk, and if there is a problem, we want to be able to surgically remove it from the marketplace.
Todd, do you have any follow-up on that?
No, I think that's good. Carol, do we have any other questions?
Well, actually, we have a comment from our audience member, Dave, and this is coming back to the question about the relationship between food safety and PTI and traceability. And he points out that in his way of looking at it, PTI is basically part of the recall segment of the food safety audit. And any response to that?
I would say that, as Dan mentioned earlier, we're not expecting to hear the reporting aspects of FSMA until 2014 now, but we haven't seen that in it. If you've gone through any of the initial publications by the FDA that are out for comments on FSMA, they've all been about food safety and about preventative measures, and that's really what the Safe Food for Canadian Act is also doing. It's really about putting the preventative measures in place. The PTI is the back end of it. It's the how do we find it if there is a problem, because the nature of the products is that there will be problems at times. We can't prevent that, but when they do occur, it's our job to be able to get them out as quickly as possible, remove them from commerce so that we do maintain our consumer confidence. So Dave, thank you for that comment, and I agree with you is that PTI is not food safety. It's the back end of it of when there is a problem, how do we take care of our problem?
Yeah, I have another question if Carol has another one. Carol, do you have another question?
Gary, go right ahead.
Okay. I hear this quite a bit, and Todd, we'll start with you, and then Dan will move to you. I want you to comment on this as well. A lot of companies have said that in the past, and I agree in the past, that companies would simply just remove all of the commodity. If a single commodity is involved in a recall, they will just remove all of the product regardless of who the supplier is. How or will that change with the PTI?
You know, my thought on that is I've heard that mentioned from different retailers before of that being their philosophy. You know, the reality is we have to come back to that consumer confidence element. If they have good controls within their own facility about what's going out, and we see the PTI voice pick code that's been put onto the labels, because a lot of these retailers are actually using those in their distribution centers to track what the item is that's going to the store. In the past, they'd simply go to a slot and say, this is where I've got my spinach, and I'm going to pull 16 boxes for this store, 2 boxes for that store, and 4 for that store, with no real knowledge of which specific supplier did those boxes come from. That's changing, and one of the things that we can thank Wal-Mart for in their leadership in this area is that when Mike Agostini was talking at the United Fresh show back in May, he talked about a strategic recall that they did, where they did have a problem. They recognized the problem. They were able to see where that problem was, and they pulled the items out of commerce. No food safety incidents, no illnesses, no public record, no big press snafu to deal with. So it just goes to show that the retailers can choose to do what they want to do, but I think that as they gain more and more confidence in their own abilities and their own tracking to the store level, that we're not going to see those commodity-wide recalls, because quite frankly, if I wanted arugula and it's not in the store that I went to and I've got to make a salad that night, I'm going to another store to buy it.
Dan, do you want to add to that?
Well, I think that Todd hit it pretty well, and the last part I think is very important. If a retailer is not able to do a surgical recall and recognize what products he has in his supply chain, what each store has. Now, knowing bulk produce, when they put it on a display, we're not tracking to the item level. So if it's on display, they may pull that. But if they know in the back end of their store that they have specific cases that are not implicated, This is somewhat, and we don't like to use this as a competitive advantage, but if store A has solid traceability, they can surgically remove their product if it's implicated that they have, and still have other product on the shelf that is totally safe. Consumers start saying, store A can do this, store B can't. The other side of that is, if you have a commodity that's taken out of the marketplace totally, if one store cannot surgically remove it and they don't have any of that commodity, just as you said, Todd, I've got a lot of choices here in Redmond, Washington on where I can shop. I've got some very specific ones, but consumers will start gravitating to say, gee, store A, they seem to be on top of this whole food safety traceability, and we know that consumers are aware of this. So I think that it's going to be an evolution, Gary. It's not going to happen overnight, but we're going to see the world is changing. There's expectations out there. We are a litigious society. No one likes to go down that road, but we need to take as many precautions as we can. And I firmly believe that PTI will be able to surgically remove that product from the supply chain if necessary.
And thank you both for responding to that. I'm going to add something to it too. As part of the original leadership group of the PTI back when I was working with PMA, I remember a lot of the retailers said this about the PTI, and I thought this was an interesting comment. And they said the PTI not only helps surgically remove, you heard Todd and Dan say, surgically remove product from the supply chain when there's a problem with the product, but what it also does is it puts product back into commerce for those whose product is fine, where they've done the testing and it's fine. So it's not just to address minimizing the amount of product that's recalled, but it's also there to ensure your product, as another provider of that commodity, gets put back into commerce as quickly as possible. So that was another point that I think was really key that I think the audience needs to hear. Carol, any other questions on your side?
Yeah, Gary, we have a question from Deb. And she's asking if you're having trouble generating the barcode to be the proper length, who should you contact? And she noticed
the
that
first line on, Carol, if I may, the first line
Sure.
on that for Deb would be GS1 actually has a service that they can validate and help you with that barcode. Not sure what the limitation is we're running into here, if it's the size of the label or you need a bigger label. I mean, you can do that too, but there are testing facilities. GS1 is more than happy. They have a solution center that they're more than happy to help with that, because it's not going to do anyone any good if the barcode is not readable, accurate, and applied appropriately. So, Todd, I'm sure you've heard this too.
I have, and the comment, Deb, that I would have for you is that first of all, go to the producetraceability.org website and download the case labeling best practices, because it will give you specifications for the size of the barcode. I have seen people who are using the proper specifications have the barcode run over, and that's generally because they have a long lot number. Your lot number under the PTI can be up to 20 characters long, and if you think about that, you've got a 14-digit G10. If you had a lot number that was 20 digits long, that might actually exceed the width on your 4x2 label. I also want to point out that the 4x2 is not cast in stone. That is a suggestion because it's a common size. Our goal was to standardize on common sizes to keep the cost down for all of the growers who are putting the labels on. If your commodity requires you to have a longer label, you might wind up with a 2x4, 2x6 size of a label, and I'm sure your retailers will accept that. What I would encourage you to do is to experiment with that with your supplier. If you're not working with a supplier, we'd be happy to help you on that. But the bottom line is that if you have a long lot number, the chances are it is going to go past the 4 inches, and you'll need to go to a wider label. Okay, do we have any other questions at this point, Carol?
Actually, yes, it looks like Deb has a follow-up question here.
Okay.
She notes that the problem they're having is getting the numbers that need to be in the parentheses.
Ah.
So I think she's referring to the numbers at the beginning, right, of the code?
Yeah, so go ahead, Dan, or I'm sorry, Gary, did you want to comment on that
Sure.
one?
Yeah, the numbers in the parentheses are called the application identifiers. And just for everyone's benefit, and Deb, this goes to you as well, the parentheses themselves do not count as the number of digits that can fit inside the barcode, but the significant characters do, the numbers do. And again, those application identifiers are numbers that tell the scanner what information is to follow. So as Todd mentioned earlier, the G10 is 14 digits long, and the application identifier for the G10 in parentheses is a 01. So already you've used up 2 characters for the application identifier, and you use 14 up for the G10. And that goes true for each data element that's inside that barcode. So to Todd's point earlier, you know, the GS1 128 barcode can hold up to 48 characters of information. So that includes the application identifiers and the data itself, the G10 number and the lot or batch number. And if your lot or batch number has a lot of characters in it versus numbers, then it's going to have some limitation. That's why they say it's up to 48 characters. The more characters you put in your lot number, the less room you're going to have to put all that information into that single barcode. Todd, did you have a follow-up on that at all?
I did. So 2 other technical points is that in the software, Deb, that you're using to print the labels, there's sometimes I've seen confusion between GS1 code 128, which has the prefixes, as well as just standard 128 symbology. So look at what symbology you're using there, because it could be that if you're not using the GS1 128, the software that you're using is not recognizing that as identifiers and actually putting the parentheses in as the data that comes out as well. And again, I think that the lot number issue is one that we need to be taking a look at. If you would like to email us your label, I'll be happy to take a look at it here and respond to you personally.
Very good. And Deb, just for reference, a good email address to use there is support@redlinesolutions.com to keep things simple and not have to spell out names. So.
Yeah, or you can also use PTI@redlinesolutions.com.
There you go.
Both of those are monitored by a group of people to make sure that we have the answers coming back to you quickly.
That's right. Well, it looks like those are all of the questions that we have for today.
And we're at the top of the hour, so I'd like to, first of all, thank our guest panelist, Dan Vaché. Dan, I know that you're doing a lot of things. You've been doing a lot of travel, and I greatly appreciate you taking the time to spread the word within the community and to help everyone understand what's new in PTI in 2013.
My pleasure, Todd, and that's part of my role with United Fresh is to help educate, and appreciate the opportunity to join you today.
Great. Gary, we'd also like to thank you. Great insights, and thanks for the overview on the ASN versus the hybrid pallet label. What we will be doing for everyone is if you did have any questions that you didn't get answered today or a question comes up later, send us an email at pti@redlinesolutions.com. Also, we will be posting a link to this recap, so if you want somebody to watch it later, that will come out. So just to the email address that you registered with, we'll get that posted, and when it comes out, we'll send you a follow-up email saying it's up there now, and you'll be able to see it. So again, thank you all for your attendance and your time today. Let us know if we can help you with any other questions, and with that, we will sign off.